They swore Ethan Cole was untouchable, too powerful, too ruthless, too protected. But on one unforgettable night in New York, at a gala drenched in diamonds and pride, a single woman walked in and shattered that illusion with nothing more than her presence. The crowd didn't know where to look first, the stunned expression on Ethan's face, the breathtaking elegance of the woman he once dismissed, or the mysterious man standing beside her whose quiet authority made even the wealthiest guests straighten their posture. Whispers rose like sparks from dry wood, each one sharper than the last. Wasn't that his ex-wife? And why did the room suddenly shift toward her as if she were the true center of gravity? From the moment she stepped through those gilded doors, the night stopped belonging to Ethan and started becoming the first chapter of his downfall. Hello everyone and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Today let's dive into the story of a man who arrived at a glittering gala believing he ruled the room, only to discover that the woman he once underestimated had returned, not for revenge, but to rewrite her destiny and his. The New York Philanthropy Honors shimmered beneath a canopy of glass and golden light, turning the modern arts museum into a cathedral of wealth and ambition. Tonight was the kind of night where power didn't need to raise its voice. It whispered through glances, handshakes, and the way people stepped aside for those who mattered. The orchestra swelled softly in the background, a graceful soundtrack to the quiet tension simmering beneath tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. Cameras flashed, diamonds sparked, and conversations moved like currents beneath a polished surface. It was the perfect scene for triumph or humiliation. And Ethan Cole had already decided which one the night belonged to. Ethan stepped out of the sleek black town car with the composure of a man who believed the city itself should pause for him. At 45, he carried his success with a certain sharp assurance, expensive, intimidating, and impossible to ignore. He wore his favorite midnight tuxedo, tailored so precisely it seemed cut from his own shadow. Behind him, a delicate hand slipped into the crook of his arm. Brianna Lane emerged, radiant in a silver gown that caught every beam of light like it was designed to chase attention. At just 24, she had perfected the art of being seen. The lingering glance, the tilt of her smile, the effortless sway of youth. Ethan glanced at her with approval, not affection. She was a symbol, his chosen proof that he had upgraded, moved on, reinvented himself. "Are you nervous?" he asked, though his voice held no real concern. Brianna laughed softly, resting her head against his shoulder for a second too long. "Only excited. Nights like this, they make you feel like anything could happen." Ethan's lips curved into a controlled smile. "Oh, something will happen tonight. Believe me." As they walked through the marble entrance, Ethan straightened his posture, scanning the room with a predator's calm calculation. He saw CEOs, senators, tech visionaries, and old money families with last names that carried more history than the museum's paintings. He nodded to each person with a composed confidence, as if the entire evening had been arranged for his benefit. 8 months after the divorce, he was determined to prove one thing. He was not the man who had been left behind. He was the man who had moved forward higher, louder, brighter. Tonight was his stage, his victory lap. And privately, beneath all the polished bravado, he wanted one person to hear about it. His ex-wife. The woman he believed blended too quietly into the background to ever shine on a night like this. He had rehearsed everything in his mind. How people would congratulate him on his latest acquisition. How Brianna's beauty would draw cameras. How whispers would ripple through the room. "Ethan looks better than ever. A real comeback." His ex must be regretting everything. The idea pleased him, almost as much as the thought of her hearing it secondhand. Ethan leaned down to Brianna as they entered the great hall. "Stay close," he murmured smoothly. "Tonight isn't just about charity. It's about making a statement." Brianna smirked. "And what statement is that?" "That I'm still the man this city watches," he replied. "And I don't fade just because someone walked out." The museum lights dimmed slightly as the gala program began, casting a soft glow over the crowd. A hush settled, mingled with the muted clinking of champagne flutes. The narrator's voice, calm, cinematic, commanding, filled the hall. "Tonight, we celebrate those who shape the future, and those who carry the power to redefine it." Ethan lifted his glass. Perfect. Exactly the kind of stage he deserved. Little did he know that the night would not bend to his script, that beneath the glitter and grandeur, fate had stitched together a very different show, one where the spotlight would shift, slowly and irrevocably, away from the man who believed he owned it. Tonight the stage was set, but not for Ethan's triumph. Somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the polished marble and crystal chandeliers, another entrance was coming, and it would change everything. The orchestra slipped into a softer melody, the kind that signaled the night had fully settled into its rhythm. Ethan lifted his champagne again, satisfied with the way conversations drifted in his direction, how Brianna sparkled at his side. Everything was unfolding exactly as he imagined, until it wasn't, because just as the spotlight swept across the hall for the next formal introduction, a subtle current, barely perceptible at first, moved through the crowd. It wasn't noise. It wasn't applause. It was attention shifting. It began at the top of the grand staircase, where the museum's glass balustrades caught the light like a halo. A woman paused there, letting the warm glow soften around her before descending with the effortless grace of someone who no longer feared being seen. Olivia Hartman. Ethan's hand froze midair, glass inches from his lips. 8 months ago, the last time he saw her, she looked nothing like this. Back then, Olivia's presence was quiet, understated. An elegant shadow who moved behind him, supporting, smoothing, carrying the weight of things he never bothered to acknowledge. She worked in the art world but rarely stood in its light. She blended into its corners the way watercolor melts into paper. But tonight she was unmistakable. Her dark hair spilled in loose waves over her shoulders, framing a face that held a calm, steady confidence he didn't recognize. She wore a deep emerald gown that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it. The fabric flowed like a quiet river, and the subtle shimmer along its seams caught the light in a way that made everyone turn just to catch another glimpse. Her posture, her gaze, the unhurried elegance of her steps, none of it belonged to the Olivia he remembered. This was a woman who had stepped out of someone else's shadow, and into her own light. And Ethan felt the first sharp twist of discomfort lodge under his ribs. Descending one step behind her was a man the crowd noticed almost immediately, not because he sought attention, but because he carried the kind that came uninvited. Marcus Hale. At 42, he had the composed presence of someone accustomed to crisis rooms, Pentagon meetings, and boardrooms where decisions shaped national security. Founder of HaleTech, a cybersecurity empire woven into every level of the U.S. government, Marcus was the kind of man whose silence weighed more than other men's speeches. He walked beside Olivia, not leading her, not overshadowing her, but standing with a protective ease that made it clear he was there for her, not for the crowd. He leaned down slightly to say something, his voice too low for others to hear. Olivia laughed. A soft, genuine sound. Ethan hadn't heard that laugh in years. The crowd noticed too. Heads turned before people even realized why. Conversations faltered. Someone whispered, "Is that Marcus Hale?" Another murmured, "And she's with him? Who is she?" But it wasn't confusion, it was admiration. Respect. Olivia wasn't the ex-wife in the room. She was the woman who had just become the center of it. Brianna tugged at Ethan's arm. Who is she?" she asked, though the uncertainty in her voice suggested she already knew. Ethan forced a tight smile. "That's Olivia," he said. "My ex. She must be trying to make some kind of statement." But even as he said it, he could hear how hollow it sounded. He watched as a senator approached Olivia first, a senator smiling, offering a handshake, speaking to her with a warmth reserved for someone of equal standing. Then the museum director joined them, followed by a pair of philanthropists from an old money family. People didn't just greet her. They gravitated toward her. Ethan's jaw tensed. This wasn't a woman trying to get attention. This was a woman who no longer needed anyone's spotlight to shine. Still, pride was a stubborn creature. "She looks different," Brianna murmured, studying Olivia's calm expression. Ethan shrugged, trying to keep his voice steady. "She's putting on a show, that's all. Believe me, she was never." He stopped. Because at that exact moment, Marcus placed a steady hand at the small of Olivia's back. Gentle, confident, intimate, and guided her deeper into the crowd. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed to be seen with him. She stood tall, serene, almost regal. and the reaction from the room was immediate. Some nodded with approval. Others whispered in interest. Everyone seemed to recognize Marcus Hale, and the way he stood beside Olivia changed the air around them. Ethan's fingers slowly tightened around the stem of his glass. The orchestra transitioned to a richer, deeper melody, but the music couldn't hide the change rippling across the hall. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The gravity of the room had moved. Where earlier the swirl of attention had followed Ethan, now it orbited around Olivia. Quietly, effortlessly, naturally. He saw it in the sideways glances, the subtle nods, the way even the most self-important guests paused to take in her presence. And worst of all, the way nobody looked at him anymore. Brianna leaned in. "Ethan, are you all right?" He didn't answer. Because for the first time that evening, Ethan Cole felt something he hadn't planned for. Something he didn't want to name. A feeling that tasted like the beginning of unease, and the end of control. For a long moment, Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the gala, his gaze glued to the woman who had become the center of a room he once commanded. The quiet shift of power around him didn't make sense, at least not until memories, long buried and deliberately ignored, began to surface one by one. He hated that the sight of her could summon the past so effortlessly. But some truths refused to stay silent. Long before Ethan Cole's name appeared on magazine covers, back when his suits were off the rack and his confidence was louder than his bank account, Olivia had been there. Not as a shadow, not as an accessory, but as the foundation he built everything upon. She worked at a modest art studio back then, her days filled with paint-scented rooms and curators with eccentric personalities. She knew gallery owners, museum board members, auction specialists, and quietly influential collectors, the kind of people who could shape the image of a rising financier just as effectively as a PR firm could. And Ethan needed shaping. He had ambition, yes, but ambition without grace made enemies. Ambition without finesse closed doors. Olivia had bridged that gap for him in ways he never acknowledged. He remembered the dinners she had planned, intimate gatherings where she arranged seating charts with surgical precision so Ethan sat beside the right investor, or the right philanthropist. She remembered conversations he couldn't hold alone, so she guided them. Art, culture, history, subjects that softened his sharper edges and made him appear more sophisticated than he truly was at the time. He remembered arriving at networking events where people greeted her first, not him, because she had already built relationships in circles he could only dream of entering. And yet, in his rewritten version of their life, he had become the architect and she the silent assistant. It wasn't that Olivia ever asked for credit. She didn't need applause. What she needed, what she deserved was acknowledgement. A simple recognition that she played a part in his rise. But Ethan had decided early on that vulnerability was weakness, and gratitude was vulnerability. So he buried the truth beneath a polished narrative where he was the self-made man, untouched by help, unsoftened by love. He spoke about their marriage as if it were a practical arrangement. He never spoke about the nights she stayed up editing his early proposals until dawn, or the afternoons she met gallery owners who later became his donors and partners. He didn't mention that his first major investor had only agreed to meet him because Olivia had convinced him Ethan was worth the gamble. To the outside world, Ethan Cole climbed the ladder alone. And he let them believe it. There was one night he could never forget, because it marked the beginning of the end, even if he didn't see it then. Olivia had come home glowing, a rare kind of light in her eyes. She handed him a letter from the Metropolitan Art Conservatory, offering her a position as a junior curator, a role she had dreamed of since college. "It's not paid," she had explained, "but it's an entry point. The real value is the access, the collections, the network. Ethan, this is the kind of chance people wait years for." He barely looked at the letter. "Unpaid means unnecessary," he said flatly. "Besides, a curator's schedule won't match the lifestyle we're building. My wife should be hosting events, traveling with me, being present, not running around in storage rooms cataloging paintings." Olivia had stared at him as if she were seeing a stranger for the first time. "This isn't a hobby," she whispered. "It's my career. My passion." Ethan closed the conversation with a single sentence, sharp enough to slice through her hope. "Your place is beside me, supporting me. That's the role that matters." He never noticed the way her shoulders fell, or the way her voice dimmed over the next few months. He only noticed that she became quieter, and he mistook it for agreement. There was another truth Ethan refused to admit, even to himself. Many of the contracts that made him powerful, those early deals that turned coal investments into something formidable, came from introductions Olivia arranged through friends in the art and philanthropic worlds. But Ethan never said thank you. And worse, he erased her from the story entirely. When he was praised for a connection he made, he accepted the praise. When a museum donor decided to trust his investment firm, he bragged about his strategic finesse. When people admired his ability to navigate high society events, he smirked and called it natural charm. Olivia simply watched, silent, fading not because she lacked brilliance, but because he refused to let her shine beside him. The first crack appeared when Brianna arrived in Ethan's orbit, young, sparkling, eager to impress. She made Ethan feel powerful, admired, relevant. He mistook her adoration for love, and mistook Olivia's quiet loyalty for dullness. He grew distant, then impatient, then dismissive, and still Olivia stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she believed in the vows they made, believed people changed, believed he would eventually see her. But he didn't. Not until it was far too late. One night, after seeing a message on his phone, a playful text from Brianna sent far too late in the evening, Olivia didn't yell, accuse, or fall apart. She simply looked at him with a calmness that frightened him more than any storm could. "Ethan," she said softly, "if you're already moving on, then so am I." He remembered the way she packed her things. Not hastily, not dramatically, but with the quiet dignity of someone reclaiming her life. She didn't ask for the penthouse. She didn't fight for assets. She walked away from everything except her own name. And Ethan let her go, because he believed Olivia Hartman had nowhere higher to rise. He realized tonight, in the shimmering glow of the gala, how spectacularly wrong he had been. For a moment the memory of their past clung to Ethan like smoke, unwelcome, stubborn, impossible to shake off. But the present surged back just as quickly, sharp and humiliating. The room still leaned subtly toward Olivia and Marcus, drawn to them as if gravity itself had shifted. Ethan swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. He refused to let the night slip away from him. Not because of her. A thin smile stretched across his lips, too controlled, too rehearsed. "Come on," he murmured to Brianna, tightening his grip on her hand. "It's time to say hello." Brianna blinked, her voice uncertain. "Are you sure? They look busy." "That's the point," Ethan replied, already leading her forward. "If she thinks she's stealing the spotlight, I'll remind her who the room is really watching." Crossing the floor felt different this time. Earlier in the night, people stepped back respectfully as Ethan passed. Now they merely shifted aside, barely acknowledging him. A few murmured greetings, but their focus drifted elsewhere. Ethan hated the change. He hated that he noticed it. When they reached Olivia and Marcus, the couple was mid-conversation with the museum director. Olivia stood with a quiet poise that made her seem untouchable, yet warm enough that people wanted to approach her. Ethan cleared his throat. "Olivia," he said, his voice a fraction louder than necessary. "Long time." She turned. Not startled. Not tense. Just composed. Her emerald dress caught the light again as she lifted her chin, offering him a soft, polite smile. "Ethan, it's been a while. I hope you've been well." That was it. 8 years of marriage, and she greeted him the same way she would greet a distant acquaintance at a gallery opening. Ethan's jaw tightened. Brianna stepped forward quickly, eager to fill the silence. "Hi, I'm Brianna." Ethan wanted to come over and... Olivia's eyes flicked toward the younger woman, not cold, just unreadable. She nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, then returned her attention to Marcus as if Brianna hadn't finished her sentence. It wasn't dismissive. It was worse. It was indifferent. Marcus finally turned to Ethan, offering a handshake that was firm enough to be felt but not warm enough to be reassuring. "Ethan Cole," Marcus said calmly. "I've heard your name come up in a few circles lately." Ethan forced a laugh. "Well, I try to stay relevant." Marcus's eyes held his, unreadable but sharp. "That depends on the circles you choose." The subtle edge in his tone scraped against Ethan's pride. He suddenly felt as though Marcus saw straight through him, Through the facade, through the arrogance, through the fragile insecurity buried beneath. For the first time in years Ethan felt assessed. Brianna, oblivious to the tension, smiled brightly. You know, Marcus, I've actually heard a lot about Olivia too. Ethan always said she was so, She paused, searching for the word Ethan once used. The word he should have never said aloud. Ethan's stomach dropped. Simple, Brianna finished, cheerful and unfiltered. Not very ambitious, I mean. He always felt like she didn't push herself enough. The silence that followed was instant and deafening. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't look offended or surprised. Instead, she offered a faint, almost wistful smile, one that held more truth than any argument could. I see, she said softly. That must have been difficult for him. Marcus's expression changed. Not in anger but in realization. He looked at Ethan with a slow, assessing gaze, the same way a seasoned strategist studies a battlefield and immediately identifies the weakest point. You told her that? Marcus asked, his voice quiet. Ethan stiffened. That's not what she misunderstood. But Marcus wasn't looking for excuses. He turned to Olivia, his tone gentle, almost reverent. Ambition looks different on everyone, he said. Some people build worlds quietly. That doesn't make them small. It makes them steady. A subtle warmth touched Olivia's eyes. Not for Ethan. For Marcus. Ethan felt something crack deep in his chest. Sharp, hollow, humiliating. The museum director, sensing the tension, excused herself. A pair of philanthropists arrived shortly after, greeting Olivia first, then Marcus, then giving Ethan the polite nod reserved for someone who was quickly fading from relevance. Olivia's presence continued to draw people, almost magnetically. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. But her confidence, new, quiet, earned, seemed to speak louder than expensive gowns or borrowed prestige. Brianna tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Did I say something wrong? Ethan swallowed hard. No. It's fine. It wasn't fine. He could feel the room slipping away from him again, inch by inch. And then Marcus spoke one last time. Ethan, he said. Sometimes the measure of a person isn't in how loudly they shine, but in what they allow themselves to overshadow. The words weren't an attack. They were a truth. A truth delivered so calmly that it cut deeper than any fight could. Ethan couldn't respond. He couldn't even look at Olivia because for the first time he saw her clearly, not as the woman he left, but as the woman he never bothered to know. Olivia gently touched Marcus's arm, signaling she wanted to move on. We should check on the contemporary wing, she said. I promised I'd look at the new installation. Marcus nodded, offering her a warm, steady smile. Lead the way. They walked off together, light, effortless, aligned. Ethan watched them go, feeling a sharp sting beneath his ribs. Not jealousy, not anger, something heavier. The sinking awareness that he had not only misjudged the woman he married, but he had also failed to see the greatness she carried long before tonight. And now the entire room saw what he never did. The confrontation at the center of the gala should have ended there. An uncomfortable exchange quickly swallowed by polite smiles and clinking glasses. But tension has a way of lingering, especially when pride is bruised and egos collide. By the time Olivia and Marcus disappeared into the crowd, Ethan felt the weight of every unspoken comparison pressing onto his shoulders. He needed to reclaim the room. He needed the night to bow to him again. And fate, cruel and timely as ever, provided the perfect stage. The lights dimmed softly, signaling the start of the live charity auction. Guests drifted toward the center hall where a spotlight illuminated the raised platform. The host, elegant, charismatic, practiced, stepped forward with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present a very special piece. A rare collaboration between digital sculpture and artificial intelligence. An artwork designed to evolve with the emotional input of its owner. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The piece is titled Pulse of Humanity. Its donors have chosen to remain anonymous. But rest assured, this is the centerpiece of the evening. Ethan straightened, sensing an opportunity. A high-value item. A crowd hungry for spectacle. A chance to overshadow Olivia and Marcus, to reclaim the narrative they had snatched from him. Brianna squeezed his arm. Are you going to bid? Ethan's smile was thin. I'm going to win. A velvet cover lifted slowly, revealing the sculpture. Soft white lights illuminated a structure of translucent metal ribbons, woven together like strands of a living organism. Holographic light pulsed through them, shifting gently in color, as if breathing. The audience fell silent. It was mesmerizing, ethereal, modern, alive. As the sculpture responded to the energy in the room, its glow deepened. It felt less like an object, and more like a heartbeat suspended midair. Then Ethan noticed something, the way Olivia stood near the edge of the crowd, looking at the sculpture as if she understood it more deeply than the rest of them. Marcus leaned in toward her, saying something quietly, and she smiled with a warmth Ethan hadn't seen in years. The realization struck him like cold water. They donated it. Together. Of course they did. And suddenly, winning the sculpture became more than a flex. It became personal. "Shall we start at $75,000? The host announced. Hands rose immediately. 100,000. 150. 200. Ethan's heart drummed, not with generosity but with a craving for dominance. He lifted his hand. 300,000. A ripple of astonishment traveled through the guests. Brianna whispered, "Wow, you're really going for it." He wasn't listening. He was watching Olivia. She glanced briefly in his direction, not shocked, not impressed, simply aware. A polite flicker of acknowledgement before turning back to Marcus. It infuriated him. Another guest raised the bid. 320. The host's eyes sparkled. "We're heating up now." Before anyone else could speak, Ethan lifted his hand again. 400,000. More gasps. More murmurs. People were beginning to stare. "Good. Let them watch." The auctioneer continued. "Do I hear 420? 420 anywhere?" A man in the back raised his paddle. 420. Ethan didn't even pause. 500,000. The room erupted, soft laughter, raised brows, impressed voices. Brianna clung to his arm, half thrilled, half overwhelmed. "Ethan, that's a statement," he said, his voice low but firm. "This is what leadership looks like." But leadership was the last thing on his mind. He was bidding against ghosts, his own insecurities, his own past, the parts of Olivia he never understood and now resented. Across the room, Olivia and Marcus remained calm. They didn't react. They didn't flinch. They didn't even consider bidding. That irritated Ethan even more. He wanted them in the game. He wanted them to lose to him, to acknowledge his power the way the old Olivia once did. But Marcus simply stood beside her with his hands in his pockets, watching Ethan with an unsettling steadiness. Unexpectedly, the museum's director approached the microphone. "Before we close the bidding, I'd like to note something unique about this piece." The anonymous donors requested that the sculpture go to a home that values emotional engagement over status. Pulse of Humanity was designed to reflect its owner's internal world. Authenticity is what allows it to thrive. The director's eyes swept the crowd. They flickered over Ethan, and then to Olivia, and to Marcus. Just a second longer. Ethan felt heat rise in his throat. Was that a message? A warning? A quiet judgment? His pulse hammered. He raised his paddle again. 600,000. The room fell silent. The host nodded slowly. 600,000 going once. No one responded. Not a hand. Not a whisper. Only the sound of the sculpture's faint electronic pulse filled the air. Ethan's chest swelled. Finally, victory. Going twice? Olivia tilted her head slightly as though studying him. Not with anger, not with disdain, but with a sort of quiet understanding that felt unbearable. And Marcus looked at Ethan with an expression far more devastating than contempt. Sympathy. Going. Marcus raised a hand. Not a bid. A gesture. Asking for the microphone. The host hesitated, then handed it to him. Marcus's voice carried through the room, steady and resonant. "This piece," he said, "was created to reflect human connection, genuine connection. It was never meant to be a trophy for ego. It's a reminder that the truest pulse of humanity comes from sincerity, not performance." He glanced at Olivia. She offered him the softest smile. Then Marcus looked back at Ethan. Not unkindly, but unavoidably. "Some things can't be bought," he said. Not even at $600,000. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They struck the room with a clarity that left no space for applause. And for the first time that night, Ethan felt something inside him splinter sharp, bruising, undeniable. For a few breathless seconds after Marcus's words echoed through the hall, time seemed suspended. The audience remained frozen, their attention fixed on the man who had just reframed the entire auction in a single devastating statement. Ethan stood rigid, his hand still gripping the bidder's paddle as though refusing to let go would somehow restore the dignity he'd lost. He expected laughter, whispers, mockery, anything to break the suffocating silence. But what came instead was worse. Pity. Quiet, suffocating pity. And then, slowly, the gala shifted back into motion, conversations resuming with a stiffness that confirmed what Ethan already felt. He had become the spectacle. The cautionary tale. The man trying too hard in a room that no longer bowed to him. But the night hadn't finished with him yet. Not even close. As guests moved toward the grand dining hall for the closing ceremony, Ethan followed in a daze. The earlier crack in his confidence had widened into something deeper. An unsettling hollowness he tried to ignore. Brianna walked quickly beside him, no longer holding his arm. "What was that?" she whispered sharply. "Why did he have to embarrass you like that? What did you ever do to him?" Ethan didn't answer. Because even he didn't know the real depth of it. Why Marcus Hale, with his quiet influence and rare public appearances, seemed to be orbiting Olivia's world and dismantling his. For years Ethan believed his world was unshakable, protected by sheer momentum and the legacy he'd built. But tonight had cracked open the illusion, revealing a truth he'd avoided for too long. He wasn't untouchable. He just hadn't been touched yet. And the first blow had come from the woman he never thought would rise above him. He walked into the dining hall with shoulders tight, heart heavy and pride already bruised, unaware that the next blow would shatter much more than pride. After dinner was served and the auction items were tallied, the host invited key donors to the stage. The room quieted as Marcus was introduced again, this time not as a bidder, not as a guest, but as a keynote speaker. Ethan stiffened. Of course Marcus would take the stage again. Of course this night wasn't done humiliating him. Marcus adjusted the microphone, his posture relaxed but commanding. "Thank you for supporting this year's Philanthropy Honors," he began. "Tonight we celebrate not just contributions but integrity, because impact without intention is merely performance." Ethan's jaw tightened. Was that directed at him? He felt Brianna shift uncomfortably beside him. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "In moments of transition, leadership is measured not by noise or bravado, but by the ability to adapt, to evolve even when the world moves without warning." A slow, uneasy murmur spread across the tables. Something was coming. Something heavy. Olivia sat beside the stage, her calm presence an anchor. When she glanced toward Ethan, her eyes held no malice, just a quiet inevitability, as though she already knew the words Marcus was about to speak. And then Marcus dropped the truth that destroyed the entire night. "HaleTech," Marcus said, "is honored to announce tonight that we have officially completed the acquisition of Cole Investments." The air split open. Gasps erupted across the hall. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone whispered, "My God." But Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. The words didn't make sense at first. They couldn't. His company, bought? By HaleTech? By Marcus? He rose from his seat, breath caught in his throat. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, voice breaking through the stunned silence. Marcus looked at him, not with triumph but with solemnity. "As of this afternoon, the deal is finalized. The board approved it unanimously." Unanimously. The word hit harder than the announcement itself. He looked around the room, faces turning away, eyes avoiding his. People he'd once impressed. People he'd once dominated. People he believed were loyal. But no one stood for him. No one defended him. They simply listened, neutral and distant, as if watching a king stripped of his crown. "This is impossible," Ethan hissed. "I own the controlling shares." Marcus shook his head gently. "You did. Months ago. Before you diluted them quietly to cover debt. Before you took on risky loans. Before you stopped paying attention." each word cut deeper, stripping away layers of denial. You weren't watching your company, Ethan. And the board wasn't watching you. They were watching its survival. Ethan felt the room tilt again, anger rising like a blaze. You planned this, he accused. You've been planning this all along. Marcus didn't deny it. Instead, he spoke with a calm that made Ethan feel even smaller. HaleTech steps in when a system is failing. Coal Investments was failing. Not because the markets were against it, but because its leader was. A murmur swept across the crowd. Agreement, understanding, realization. Brianna pushed her chair back suddenly, panic seizing her expression. Ethan, what does this mean for us? For your position? He cut her off sharply. Not now. But Brianna wasn't listening. Her voice trembled. Are you losing the company? Are we going to be okay? And that was the moment. The moment Ethan saw the truth he never dared face. This wasn't loyalty. This was fear. The fear of losing privilege. Losing status. Losing shine. Brianna stood abruptly, shaking her head. I can't do this. I can't be part of whatever this is. And she walked out. No hesitation. No goodbye. Just gone. Ethan didn't chase her. He couldn't. He was staring at the ruins of what he believed was indestructible. Marcus returned the microphone, stepping away as the applause slowly rose. Not for the acquisition, but for the message behind it. A message Ethan understood too late. Power wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need validation. Real power was quiet. Intentional. Steady. The kind Olivia always had. The kind he ignored. The kind Marcus carried effortlessly. And now, standing in the center of the gala with every eye turning away from him, Ethan felt the truth settle heavily in his chest. This wasn't sabotage. This was consequence. The fall didn't begin tonight. It began the moment he stopped valuing what mattered, and the moment he believed he was untouchable. Tonight was simply the moment the world finally caught up. For several long seconds after Marcus stepped off the stage, Ethan remained frozen at his table, his breath shallow, his pulse erratic. The applause still echoed faintly around him, but none of it felt real. It sounded distant, like applause for someone else in a different world he no longer belonged to. He had lost control. Lost the room. Lost everything he believed defined him. The moment Brianna's heels disappeared behind the velvet curtains, the final thread snapped. Ethan's chest tightened, but anger didn't come. Neither did denial. Only a cold, unfamiliar emptiness. The gala lights glittered above him, the same lights he once imagined spotlighting his triumph. Now they only illuminated the truth he couldn't avoid. He wasn't the victor of this night. He was the warning. When the event concluded and guests began drifting toward the exits, Ethan stayed seated until the room was mostly empty. Conversations resumed around him, soft and cautious, as though people were afraid to get too close to whatever remained of him. Eventually he stood, his legs heavier than they'd ever felt. The walk toward the exit felt like crossing a battlefield after defeat. Quiet, exposed, raw. No one approached him. No one offered a sympathetic smile. Even those who had once courted his favor avoided his eyes, turning their bodies just enough to create distance. A senator he once bragged about advising stepped aside with a murmured, "Excuse me." A tech CEO who used to admire him nodded politely, then walked in the opposite direction. A former partner simply pretended not to see him. Every movement, every gesture carved the same truth deeper. He wasn't a leader tonight. He was a lesson. Ethan stepped out into the cold night air, alone, stripped of the armor he'd worn for years. Status, ego, attention. The city lights glimmered like indifferent stars, reflecting off the polished museum steps as he descended with slow, uneven breaths. His car wasn't waiting for him. Brianna had taken it. So Ethan walked, hands trembling, pride shattered. The echo of his own footsteps the only sound accompanying him down the sidewalk. For the first time in years no spotlight followed him. Only darkness. Across the museum courtyard, another pair exited through a quieter door. Marcus held it open for Olivia, letting the soft glow of the hallway fall behind her as they stepped out toward a sleek electric luxury car parked nearby. The city breeze lifted a few strands of her hair, brushing them gently across her cheeks. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't glow with the satisfaction of revenge. Her expression was calm, thoughtful, almost solemn. Marcus noticed. "You're quiet," he said softly, unlocking the car. Olivia glanced back toward the museum, where faint silhouettes still moved inside. "I was just thinking," she murmured. Marcus waited, his patience gentle and unwavering. Then she shook her head with a small, steady breath. "Tonight wasn't about watching him fall," she said. "It was never about that." Marcus studied her, admiration softening the edges of his expression. She continued, her voice slightly firmer, as though finally giving shape to the truth she'd carried for months. "Tonight was about us. About moving forward. About choosing something better than the past." Marcus reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with quiet certainty. "You deserve that," he said. "You deserve everything good that's coming." Olivia smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. Not born from victory over someone else, but from finally choosing herself. She let Marcus help her into the car, settling into the soft interior as the city sounds faded behind the closed door. He walked around to the driver's side, slid in beside her, and for a moment the world narrowed to the gentle hum of the engine and the closeness between them. Marcus glanced over once more. "You ready?" Olivia nodded. "Yes. I'm ready for what comes next." He smiled. Slow, steady smile that felt like the beginning of something certain and lasting. "Then let's go." The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the museum behind as if leaving an entire chapter sealed within its walls. As the night settled across Manhattan, the contrast between two departures told a story bigger than any gala headline. Ethan's downfall wasn't Olivia's victory. His collapse wasn't her triumph. The true victory was the woman Olivia had become. Resilient, luminous, self-assured. A woman who rebuilt herself from quiet sacrifice into quiet power. A woman Marcus saw clearly from the beginning, in all the ways Ethan never could. And while Ethan walked alone through the cold, haunted by the pieces of the life he shattered, Olivia stepped confidently into a future crafted with care, intention, and love. Her win was not in watching someone else break. Her win was in becoming someone unbreakable.